to get that fitness or that performance, you have to ride that line, and you don't know where that line is of injury until you cross it. And I think pushing yourself hard is the best teacher as to where that line is. And that's what I'm here for, as if you cross the line and then we can get you back on the other side.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 1% Healthier podcast. My name is Megan Timpson. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Josh Slesk. Josh is a physical therapist who owns a practice in Tempe, Arizona. His practice consists mostly of treating HYROX athletes and runners, and he is a HYROX athlete marathoner himself and believes that the only true way to protect yourself from sickness is through fitness. So, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Of course. Today I'm excited because we are going to be talking about how to stay healthy and strong and injury-free with all of our running goals for those of us who are training for long distance, but also for HYROX, especially those who are coming to my HYROX classes and everything. We want to make sure that we are being able to recover from all the work that we're putting in. So before we get into the meat of today's episode, Josh, can you give us a bit of your background as both a physical therapist and as a runner yourself?
Yeah, I grew up playing team sports, traditional team sports like football and basketball, but my dad was always a runner. And then in college, I started running a little bit, ran my first marathon like the week before COVID shut everything down. I remember that pretty vividly. But I went to school at UVU in Utah and started having an interest in more like the strength conditioning aspect of stuff. So I started working with some of the teams there as an intern. Loved that. Decided to pursue PT, went out to Tennessee, worked with the golf team out in Tennessee, actually, in the strength and conditioning realm. And so that was actually a blast. I love doing that and got my doctorate in physical therapy, then came out here to Arizona and interned up at Exos Sports facility up there in North Phoenix for a while, and then opened up my own practice down in Tempe. And just kind of, my own fitness has always revolved around kind of endurance sports. And so that's kind of what I've gravitated to, treating those same people because that's what I'm familiar with. And I think it helps to have a really good understanding of what people are going through as they're training for stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely gives you perspective and insight that you wouldn't have if you didn't run and race yourself. So that's
Mm.
super cool. A little bit on your races and your past, on any races that you've done, the marathons, the HYROX and stuff. What has been your favorite race and also your toughest race, both physically and mentally?
Oof. That's a good one. Favorite race, honestly, is probably the BPN 50 miler. I thought they did a really good job with that. I did that a couple years ago. That was a really fun one. The energy was just really high the whole time. It felt like a fever dream, honestly, because you're running through the night the whole time. So it was a good time though. So that was really fun. I would say hardest, I think I blew up really hard at the Nashville Rock and Roll Marathon a few years back. I felt in really good shape, but there's a little bit more elevation than I was prepared for, and then it got super hot. And so that's the only time I've ever walked, I think, in like a marathon was that race, and it hit me pretty hard. And so that was probably the hardest mentally because that's the only time I've really bonked, I think, hardcore in a race. And so, yeah, definitely went through that.
Cool. I didn't know that you did the BPN 50 miler. That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. I got to hug Nick Bear, so like I haven't showered since then because I think I got to hug him. I'm just kidding.
Yes. Well, for the people that are listening to this podcast and are wanting to run far, lift heavy, and stay injury free, what do you feel like makes a difference between runners that are able to stay strong and stay injury free versus runners that do constantly run into injuries? What are they doing differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would probably put them into two categories. One is the category that is doing too much and they're not controlling for volume as they jump into a new race. So if we talk about HYROX, for example, we ran into a lot of this in Phoenix specifically, getting ready for the Phoenix HYROX, and especially coming off of like Phoenix Marathon and all that kind of stuff was all around the same time period where people don't control for their volume. Jumping into a HYROX, I think a lot of times people think they should start doing high intensity workouts 5 times a week, but also be running on top of that. And that load compounds pretty fast on a body. And so controlling for volume is a huge thing. And then I would say that the second category is people that are just running and not taking the strength work seriously. We could talk about the numbers, but the nice thing is that people who want to run and lift, they actually have way less incidents of injury, like significantly less incidents of injury, as long as we're lifting kind of in the correct way. And so the people that just shirk the lifting completely or only do high intensity lifting might be missing out on some of those benefits. And so I think I'd put them in those two categories: volume, or the people that just discard lifting completely as they get into more running volume.
Hmm. Okay. And for the people that are wanting to manage their volume properly, what are the things that they should be thinking about, like over the course of a week or a month, or like tapering for the races? Is that what you're thinking about when you want to manage volume correctly, or how would you want your athletes to be thinking about that?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of nuance to it. It's going to depend on the race that they're doing, and it also depends on training history as well. I think that's vastly underrated. Like, what are you used to doing?
Mm,
If you have a history of being a runner, then like you can probably bump up your running volume relatively quickly and intensity relatively quickly. If you haven't been running more than 5 miles a week, then bumping up your running volume is going to take a lot more load on the body, and you're gonna have to adapt to that. That's gonna take a little bit longer to adapt. So knowing the person's training history is gonna be huge. But also one way that we can do it is the acute to chronic workload ratio. There's ways that we can use like rating of perceived exertion across multiple different modalities of exercise, like lifting or high intensity or running. And we can start to try to give them a number and try to progress that number more objectively over week.
mm.
Um, so we can be objective about it, or we can be subjective in kind of knowing how our body is feeling as we adapt to new modalities.
Gotcha. So, okay, I like that objective measurement because then I think that that gives each athlete, depending on their training background, how they can progress and not do too much too soon. Because I think that that's something I see a lot of people just wanting to do more, do more, do more, but they don't understand that they are putting a lot of stress and load on their body and not giving their body time to actually adapt to it. So,
Yeah, I mean, like leading up to HYROX Phoenix, I think we caught 6 bone stress injuries because people thought that they needed to do 3 to 4 high intensity workouts a week and start building their running on top of that. And so, like, sometimes they didn't even account for the running they did inside their high intensity workout, whether it's F45 or a different HYROX style gym or something like that, where there's potentially running involved. They don't account for that running in their training volume. And when they're running at higher speeds, there's more load on the system. And so you have to be pretty granular, especially with a HYROX athlete, about what their volume actually looks like because the training can be vastly different depending on where they're at and what plan they're using.
mm, that's a really good point. For the athletes that are training for high rocks and they start to notice, well, how would you recommend thinking about like I'm feeling sore from my running versus when should I like continue to run versus pull back from my running if I'm afraid of being injured or afraid of getting a bone stress injury or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we can grade injuries on a scale of 1 to 4. There's different grading systems out there in the literature, but if we use that system, there's a grade 1 is like that you're having pain after a run, maybe some soreness after a run. I'm generally okay with some of that, like as long as it doesn't progress over the next few days. Grade 2 is you're starting to have pain during your session, and that's usually when we want to intervene. Like if there's
Mm,
some pain during the session, that's like, okay, we gotta maybe figure this out before this progresses to where a grade 3 is starting to bother you quite a bit more, but you can maintain your training, or it's grade 4, we have to shut things down. And so I call it like that grade 2. Like there's going to be some general joint soreness. If you notice both sides, like both knees are a little bit achy after a long run that you haven't done a long run in a while, like that's relatively normal. But if you start noticing things like one-sided that maybe linger more than 24 hours after your session, like okay, it starts to poke up some flags that we might be dealing with something.
mm. That is actually a very good visual or something to think about is if it's either one-sided or if it's happening during or after your long run. So that was something I was thinking about. The more that I'm doing longer and longer runs for like a half marathon, I'm like starting to pay attention. Okay, am I feeling sore during my runs or am I feeling sore after my runs? Should I pull back? Should I try harder? Should I like try less? I don't know. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Hmm.
Another thing that when it comes to like increasing training mileage or thinking about preparing for races, how would you recommend recovering from a lot of training volume or from long runs in general? Are there any like recovery modalities or sleep or compression boots or massages or getting PT, obviously, but what do you recommend for recovery when you're training a lot more?
Yeah, I mean it's the unsexy stuff that's going to make the biggest difference. It's the sleep, it's the nutrition and it's the managing your life stress. It's like those things,
Mm.
the things you do on a daily basis, that's going to be probably 80 to 90% of the battle, to be honest, from a
Yeah.
general recovery standpoint. Now, like I like some other things, like compression boots can be nice to move some fluid out after a long run. I'm a fan of like contrast therapy, like hot and cold alternating. I think that's a really solid one. And then there's a couple supplements and things like that. But if we're really just like trying to put a band-aid over a gaping wound, if we're missing out on the sleep, nutrition, and like life stress, the other stuff isn't really going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's probably where I resonate a lot with like your perspective and take is we have to get to the root of it and the big life things, whether it's stress, nutrition, your sleep, and everything. And then the other things can also help and support, but those are supplemental on purpose. And so,
Mm.
do you feel like there's anything that has given you that perspective specifically? Because I remember reading in your bio, you'd mentioned like believing that the only way to protect yourself from sickness is through fitness. Have you had any life experience that has given you that perspective or made you take that perspective?
That's a good question. I think we've all probably seen grandparents or people that we know or love that have kind of gone through the aging process, and you kind of see quality of life decline. You see sometimes that they don't seem like the same person mentally after a while. And like that hits hard, for most of us to have a loved one go through that. And so I've been taking a keen interest in like my grandpa, for example, had dementia and he had it for multiple years. And it was like hard when he stopped recognizing you. And then, when there's times where he's combative or didn't know where he was, and you kind of lost that person before he even passed away. And so I've taken a keen interest, like how do you prevent that? How do you live a life? Because you see some people that like are in their 70s and are still killing it. They're still skiing or biking or doing all that kind of stuff. And there's always some unpredictability. We can never protect ourselves against everything in life, but fitness is by far the best thing that we have to protect against neuro diseases and cardiovascular diseases, which kill most of us in this country. And like, there's no pill that's as effective as fitness. There's nothing mentally or physically that does what fitness does. And my part in that continuum is I just want to keep people fit. You know what I mean? So like, there's to have the fitness required to live that kind of life where you can avoid the medical system and you can avoid some of these pitfalls, you're going to have some aches and pains. Like tweaks are going to pop up when you're pushing your body. And so that's what I'm here for, is to correct those before they become an issue. Because there have been plenty of times where I've heard people that say, hey, I tweaked my back when I was 35 and I just stopped working out because I was scared to hurt it again. And then that leads down that spiral path. So my whole goal is to intervene before you lead down that spiral. Let's get you back in the gym so that you can do the thing that matters, and that's fitness.
Hmm. I love that so much. I totally resonate with that perspective of like preventing and wanting to intervene and making sure that you can live. And what's the onward physical therapy? Pain free? What is
Oh,
the back of
hurt
your shirt?
less, get hurt less, or something like that. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes. Wait,
Huh.
say it again.
Hurt less, get hurt less.
Yes, yes. I love that because I feel like if you can hurt less and you get hurt less, and if you're just like doing the things that matter, then you can continue to excel in all the things that actually matter to you. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I hope that answered your question. Just a,
Yeah, yeah, you did. I was thinking about
I just went on a rant, but
no, I was like, keep going. That's
yeah.
great. Now, when it does come to like the recovery stuff, do you have a recommended like pre and post workout run routine that you feel like actually does make a difference? Whether it's like stretching, rolling, stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. And maybe we'll ruffle a couple feathers here, but I think that for your normal run, like you're just going out for a jog or like your steady state run, I think warm-ups are kind of a waste of time. The evidence doesn't really support it. Nobody really does it. You'll see an influencer on Instagram post like their pre-run routine. Like they don't actually do it. They're just posting about it. And so I like for your general run, we're just gonna go out and run for 40 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever. Just run a little bit slower the first time. You'll warm up. And now, like my caveat is, yeah, warm up is important when you are going right into a race and you got to go like 100% right off the bat or speed work or something like that. Warm up becomes
Mm.
more important. But I think for your general steady state runs, nobody actually does it, and I don't think the literature supports that you need to do it anyway. So I will that's my my soapbox there. Um I actually think that I find that the central nervous system plays a lot of role in warm up and cool down for a lot of exercise, for a lot of fitness things, not just running. So I like getting the central nervous system ramped up. Like before a high intensity interval session, you might need a little bit more of a warm up there if you're about to jump into like something super intense. I really like getting the heart rate up through exercise bike, like hammering some hard intervals, because I find that that warms my body up more than even a specific drill. Now, if you have a specific mobility deficit or something like that that you're working through, then by all means, we get more specific with it. But I think generality is helpful. And so with that same vein, what I like on a cool down, I've been playing with this a little bit more, is when I get back from a run, is I'll actually just lay down and I will do some box breathing to like ramp down the central nervous system. And I actually have really enjoyed doing that. And because there's times where like if I get back from a run, I jump right into other stuff. My watch will even give me a notification like 30 minutes later, like, hey, you seem stressed. But it doesn't do that when I ramp down the central nervous system after a training session. So I've kind of liked that approach recently, to be honest. By all means, that there is a time and place for specificity with stretching or with a like foam roll in the presence of a certain mobility deficit. But by and large, I don't think that those are the end all be all. I think attacking the central nervous system globally is a more effective and better use for our time.
Hmm. I totally agree with that. That's actually so cool that you bring that up because that's what I've been incorporating into some of my workouts as well, both
Mhm.
through like warm-ups, whether it's through something a little bit more explosive or like high intensity that you said. And that's cool that you talk about like the box breathing after. Are there specific movements or workouts that you would recommend to a general workout or a high intensity workout for prepping your nervous system for that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Honestly, it's just like moving. I think like the
Mhm.
exercise bike or the assault bike is my favorite because your whole body's into it and you can
Mm,
ramp up your heart rate pretty fast there. So I think anything really to get your heart rate up prior to jumping into something like high intensity is pretty good.
cool.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try that. I haven't done the assault bike in a minute, so that's gonna be my next.
sucks, but it's good. Yeah.
I've been seeing that on the stories that you guys have posted on the Suffer City workouts, and I can already imagine like that's a hard workout. So
Yeah, it's gnarly.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about recovery, what do you feel like is underrated versus overrated when it comes to post-workout recovery?
Yeah, I think underrated is definitely getting some nutrition relatively soon afterwards. With my schedule, there's been times I used to kind of be like, oh yeah, whatever. But there's been times in the last few weeks or months that I've noticed like where I'll hit a hard session, but I'm not able to really quite eat because I have to go jump into the clinic or with the kid, everything's just kind of crazy. And I'll notice that if I don't eat, I just feel like crap at the end of the day. And so eating and properly fueling soon after, I think is really important. I think that's underrated. I think contrast therapy is kind of underrated. I kind of like that one a lot. If you think about it from like a blood vessel standpoint, like where you can, you're basically the cold will constrict the blood vessels, the hot will dilate the vessels. It's almost like a giant full body pump, almost like you have a compression sleeve over your whole body. And when you're doing that whole thing, it's kind of a thought process. And so I kind of like that. That's a little bit more less accessible for most people. And so I think that those things are underrated. Overrated, I think stretching is overrated. Uh, and I have data to back that up. I think, yeah, just like general stretching, I don't think it does much, to be honest, unless we're targeting a specific thing. I think people, I'd be a rich person if like I had a dollar for every time someone like talks to me about their injury and there's like, oh, I just don't stretch enough. Like I can guarantee that's probably not the issue. And they did a big review. Sorry, and I'm going down a rabbit hole. They did a big review in 2011. It had like 5,100 participants. It was a huge study, or it was like systematic review, and they found zero like concrete evidence that stretching reduced injury in runners. Like whether you stretch beforehand or aside from like where your runs were, like just on its own, there was like zero concrete evidence there. And so you can get a stretch. Like I could stretch my hamstrings all day. I would much rather do an RDL with like eccentric loading. That's going to strengthen my hamstrings eccentrically and stretch them at the same time. like my bang for my buck is like a thousand times for just like stretching my hamstrings. And so I think that that's vastly overrated. And most people don't even know what they're stretching. They're like, oh, this feels okay, but they don't know why or what they're stretching.
Yeah. Okay, wow. That is a hot take, but I like that hot take because then it takes the pressure off of like feeling like you have to stretch all the time. And that's the reason why you're either not making progress or that's the reason that you're injured is because you weren't stretching enough. So good.
Especially with running, I'll say, because like running is a pretty low mobility sport. You don't need a lot of mobility to run. And like so the that data was for runners. There might be some specific things related to maybe shoulder mobility or something like that in a CrossFitter. I mean, I guess you can maybe extrapolate that to HYROX, but I really think that the principle remains the same.
Hmm. Okay, cool. There was a question that someone had asked me about running form because they wanted to make sure like running form was good. And I know that you've done some workshops on one being a becoming a durable runner, but I remember going to one where you were talking about cadence and like checking like your Garmin on that and making sure that you have good running form. How much should we be thinking about our running form versus like letting that come naturally, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to zoom out for a second, when I have a runner or HYROX athlete come in and with an injury, there's usually four buckets that I look at. One is their running mechanics. One is their strength and mobility, if we're missing strength and mobility somewhere. One is their programming, and one is their lifestyle factors. And so between those four things, we usually can find a reason why there's an injury on board. So putting it in that lens, that like mechanics aren't the only thing, but they are a thing that can definitely contribute. There's no one perfect cadence. There's no one perfect steps per minute. If we look at all the elite runners, they're all well above 180. And most of our average runners are like in the 160s. We do have some data to support that under 165 puts us at a higher risk for injury. And if we think about it from a biomechanical standpoint, typically slow cadence will lead to more of an overstride and a heel strike pattern. Not always, but by and large. And we can use like the tibial angle, like the tibia, as kind of like a proxy. It's not perfect, but I like using it a lot in clinic because you can show sometimes like for every action, there is a reaction, right? So if you're hitting your heel against the floor or the ground and your tibia is pointed backwards at you, you have force coming back against the direction that you want to go. And so, like, just by logic, we know like we would rather have it more fluid moving forward, and higher cadence lends itself to that typically. And it also lends itself to less joint loading on areas that we don't really want load. The slower our cadence is and the more we heel strike, the more the force is going to be towards the front of the shin and not towards the calf. And if you look at a leg, the calf was built for the force, right? And so let's put the force to the calf, not the shin, is the general rule. Again, there's debate about it, but like by and large, most people could probably afford to increase their cadence by 5 to 10%.
Mm, okay. Which is just taking quicker steps, essentially, right?
Essentially, yeah, more faster turnover. You'll have less overstride if you're running at the same pace with a faster cadence. You'll have more
Mhm.
turnover, but your landing should be a little bit more economical and like biomechanically advantageous for you.
Mm, cool. Are there any mental cues to think about to help increase your cadence or increase your running form that you think about?
Yeah, it's literally just like
Just
you
go faster.
just
Pick up your feet quicker.
yeah. Just like that. I mean I use the metronome a lot. So like you just pop this puppy on. You can see you can like measure where your cadence is at or look at your watch and see where your average cadence is. We bump it up by 5 to 10%, put it on the metronome, run to the metronome. That's kind of
Got it.
like the main thing.
Okay, I like that. That's helpful. Another question on injury prevention is what do you feel like would be like signs of maybe it's time to pull back, it's time to rest, or you're maybe going to be developing injury? Like, what are those warning signs that most runners ignore that you should not ignore?
Yeah, good question. One, I think wearables aren't perfect, but wearables can give us some data. If you are noticing that, let me put it this way, like if you're noticing that your recovery score is drastically lower than typical and it's not improving, we might be overtraining. If you notice that your sleep is like kind of trash or it's not rejuvenating you. Another way is you can use your RPE, your rating of perceived exertion, during your sessions. Now, one session doesn't really make a difference. Like you just have sessions that are crappy sometimes. But if
Hmm.
you have stack days where you notice that like things feel drastically harder, then that's probably a sign of overtraining. We could talk about like low energy availability, which ties in super significantly with nutrition, right? But there's a lot of factors that go into that. If you just feel fatigued, if you feel grouchy, if you have low libido, if you like are feeling like there's always some nagging pain going on, like those can all be signs of low energy availability and that something's brewing, even if something hasn't come to the surface yet.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, I feel like those are really good things to pay attention to. You just gave a workshop on like low energy availability, right?
Yeah,
Or
it was
like,
like part of my workshop. Yeah, yeah, through
yeah.
it. Mhm.
What do you feel like are the things that we need to know besides one, like the symptoms of like grogginess, being grouchy, etc., and fatigue? How do you recommend like preventing that?
It's a super good question. I mean, like part of it is out of my scope. Like I would
Sure.
recommend a nutritionist figures out some of that stuff. I have a client, she's training for a half marathon just recently, and I just asked, like she was just feeling like my workouts kind of suck and just feeling so tired. And I asked her like what she'd been eating for carbs, and she'd been doing like almost keto and had like a half a cup of rice a day. And so we're like, like maybe we should try not doing that. And like she came in the next time, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so much better." And like we didn't even talk about specifics, but like just little things like that you can start to notice. But if it's a prevalent problem or someone has an eat history of an eating disorder or something like that, then I really think a nutritionist is the best one to cover that. But it's important that clinicians like me are aware of that. That could be a potential indicator in the clinic and at least be able to screen for it and provide some basic suggestions from the get-go.
Yeah, totally. I think that's something that is often overlooked is low energy availability. Like people think that they're like eating healthy, but they're not necessarily eating enough, or they're not eating enough to support the training that they're doing. Like what you're saying, like she was almost eating keto and barely any carbs, right? We need carbs to one function, but two to be able to recover and support our training, especially if we're doing a lot of high intensity and endurance work. So
Sure.
yeah. Okay. Let's talk about like real life, like problem solving for the listeners who are running more that are increasing their mileage. What would you want them to start incorporating when it comes to strength training? Like, what would you like them to do every session, or making sure they have certain movements in their training to become stronger runners?
Aha, I like this question. Okay. Well, because my background's in strength and conditioning, I really like this stuff. Can I talk for a second? Can I like blab? I'm gonna talk
Please,
as much as I
please,
can.
yes.
Generally, let me talk about general and then specific. Generally, I think that runners need compound lifts. They usually avoid compound lifts. If we're talking about the optimal, there's optimal and then there's acceptable depending on someone's time or equipment or anything like that. But if we're talking about optimal, I think plyometrics are huge and vastly underrated twice per week. I think compound lifts, squat, deadlift, the squat and hinge patterns are huge. Being able to prioritize those and actually take a break in between if you see like someone online, I think I'm seeing this less, but like they'll try to mimic running in their weightlifting. And I'm like, that's just like we're running a bajillion steps a week. We don't need to mimic running in the weight room. We need to stimulate the stuff that we haven't stimulated all week, which is like pure strength. We need to fill that.
Mm,
So I think mimicking running is kind of a not a great use of our time. And so compound lifts, plyometrics, two things that they probably aren't getting, like higher level plyometrics, not just like mimicking the running pattern, but trying to get a little bit more power. Single leg bounding is a great one. So once we've hit those, then we can talk about like there's infinite variability, right? But I do like doing some single leg stuff because I think that single leg stuff will translate a little bit better to more stability in the running. So I like single leg RDLs. I like Bulgarian split squats. You can start filling in the gaps here with whatever you like. It doesn't have to be single leg, but like I like to bias towards single leg stuff in my accessory lifts because I think that that lends itself a little bit more to stability in the runner. So that's probably like ideal, making sure that we spend time, plyometrics, compound, and then kind of bias towards single leg in the accessories. Now, specifically, I think that the way maybe bringing all this together, the way that we prevent injuries or rehab injuries is by targeting our specific weaknesses. And so we have something that we at Onward we like to call the REMOM. You're probably familiar with an EMOM, like every minute on the minute. Called a REMOM, rehab every minute on the minute. Clever. Haha. And basically it's taking what your limitations are. Like we all have sticky spots depending on our body and what we're doing. For me personally, when I start to get high mileage or high vert, which I am right now as I'm prepping for the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, my hip starts to get a little icky and I start to sometimes even get a little bit of nerve tension down the leg. And I really don't deal with it usually until I'm getting into like where I'm doing 40 miles a week and a lot of vert. I know that about myself. And so when I started to get into this, I use my rehab EMOM. And for me, that looks like a heavy RDL because my hamstrings are a limiter for me. Heavy RDL. I'll do like a modified pigeon stretch that targets my posterior hip capsule joint because that is a sticky spot for me too. My hip internal rotation is kind of sucky. And so I like to target that. And then I like to do like a hamstring nerve slider as well, just for a little bit of nerve health. Sometimes I'll throw another thing or two in there, but those are like my staples. I did that pretty consistently when I was getting a lot of running in for Phoenix Marathon and didn't deal with any of the specific stuff that I dealt with in the past. And so that's how we get specific and granular about it is not just like some random rehab exercise that you saw online, but actually knowing what your personal limitations are and attacking those directly. And that's where I feel like a PT, even pre-injury, is huge because we can identify and address those limitations way earlier than before like an injury actually pops up.
Mm. Wow, that's actually so cool. One, I've never thought of like a remom, so that is cool.
Yeah.
And picking like the what you're personally limited in and like the what parts, because I know like for me it's either a hip or the knees or something like that, and to be able to strengthen that, would you incorporate that at, like the end of your strength workout to target the specific areas that you need, or where would you implement that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe like the perfect ideal would be like the back end of a workout for sure, like a strength workout. But in
Hmm.
reality, you can do it whenever. I don't think that you're going to be missing gains by doing it whenever, 2 to 3 times a week. I have three exercises. I do them 3 times each. It takes me 9 to 10 minutes to do it. It's a very accessible for most people, and you can kind of cater depending on what people's equipment needs are. Yeah, did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm like, oh, wow, that's something so simple, but I know could make a big difference if you incorporated that a couple times a week, like you said. And then, yeah, that does answer like the big question of like what should runners be focused on when it comes to strength stuff, like the plyometrics, the compound lifts, and then when it comes to like your accessory lifts, the single leg remaining deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, a little bit of that, which is awesome. Like those are all such good moves. So
I think it's
that's
just so easy to like see on Instagram that you see like some account that's like your ankles are weak and this is why. And so you try out this exercise, but like maybe your ankles aren't weak, or maybe you have plenty of ankle range of motion and you're just like attacking it for no reason and it's just a waste of time. And so I think that the key is identifying what you actually need, and so you save a ton of time and frustration. It doesn't take that long to target it, but you just have to know what you're getting after. You know what I mean?
hmm yeah, for sure. Along with the recommended strength exercises for runners, are there any like habits that you would recommend that they have when it comes to either recovery, rehab, running routines? Are there any habits that you would want your athletes to have to be a healthy, strong runner?
I don't know. I think like just taking ownership of your training is huge. I think sometimes people kind of just like wing it like day by day what they're going to do in training for something, and that's fine for some things, but it's not fine for other things, especially when we start talking about getting into a half marathon or a marathon or HYROX even. Taking ownership of where you're, I think we look at those four categories again that we talked about, like taking ownership of some of your lifestyle factors, like, hey, I do need some sleep, and taking ownership of that, taking ownership of your nutrition, and then knowing where your weak points are, like strength or mobility related, and being able and willing to address those. And then, yeah, mechanics too might be a factor as well. But I just think that the people who take ownership and have a goal associated with something usually are a little bit more dialed in. And so I really like working with people that have goals and like a race goal in mind or a time goal in mind, because I think it just helps us direct the process so much. And
Hmm.
so I guess it's not really a habit, but I guess that's what I like working with people is people that have the goals, because then it really directs exactly what we're doing. Sometimes when we're so general, there's so much nuance to a lot of these rehab and strength and conditioning principles that the generality can kind of put us in a loop because we don't know exactly what we're going for, and there's a million different things we can do.
Hmm. I I like that a lot. While it's not a habit like you were saying, I think being able to take ownership is a good mindset and mentality and approach to your fitness in general, because if you don't know where you're going, then you can just go anywhere. So,
Yeah. Like, what's the best exercise for this? I'm like, well, what are we trying to do? I mean, like that's gonna nuance the answer significantly, and so that helps.
yeah, for sure. I have two more questions for you. So, with everything that you have done for your training and all the patients that you've treated, what do you feel like is something that you've changed your mind on when it comes to recovery or training?
Yeah, good question. I think that probably the biggest one is actually rest, because I firmly believe that like just avoiding an activity that got you injured is not the best path forward. That we need to use the gym and we need to stay fit as best as possible while we're dealing with an injury. Sometimes what an injury needs is a week or two off. And I used to not be quite willing to accept that. Like, oh, we can train around this or things like that. And so there's a nuance to that, but sometimes really what it does need is a couple weeks off, and being willing to admit that and recognize that and transmit that to a client, I think is huge, because if I overpromise that like, hey, we can keep doing everything we want while we rehab this, we might both be in trouble in a few weeks when it's not getting better. And so recognizing those positions and when actual rest is needed, I think is important. And to be fair, like actual rest doesn't mean just sitting on your butt for 2 weeks. It's still doing other stuff and cross training, but like legitimately offloading something for 2 weeks, or whatever it is, I think that's what I've changed my mind on.
Mm, that's good to know. Do you like cross training if you're running and you need to take time off of running? Do you recommend like the elliptical or like the bike or anything like that?
Yeah, it depends on the injury, but typically one of those two is usually pain-free for people, and you can maintain some good cardio while we rehab something down the chain. So yeah, usually one of those two is what people's favorites because swimming sucks. So
Yeah, true. That's true. Well, thank you so much for all this information on preventing injuries, because I feel like I've actually learned a lot about how to think about my training when if I give any like icky feelings in knees or hips or something, like how to think about that and when I need to get some PT or when I need to pull back and rest. I think that's been super helpful for everybody as we like wrap up this podcast. If the listener only took one piece of information away from this podcast, what would you want it to be?
I would just hope people would feel empowered that their bodies are resilient and there's a lot of things that you can do. But I think that you also need to trust in your body a little bit when it's giving you signals, for whether that's the signal to push or whether that's a signal to push or to pull back. And that ability to read those signals comes better the more we exercise, the more we do things. But I think being able to trust the body is both in its capabilities and its limitations, I think is the biggest thing, and recognizing when we might need a little bit of help with that.
Mm. That's really cool. I think that that is one of the best things that we can learn is to trust in our bodies and to be able to be in tune with when to push ourselves and when to pull back. Do you have any like personal experience that you could share about like when you maybe like a light bulb moment of like, oh, this is what it feels like when I should push harder, or like this is a sign that I need to pull back. Do you have any experiences like that?
I don't think there's anything like an endurance race. Like for me, the marathon in teaching you that principle, because it's like a whole training block condensed, into 3 hours or whatever. Like just the amount that you're able to be in tune with your body during those situations. Like when you hit mile 16 and you're like, hey, I know I can drop a couple seconds per mile right now. I know I have enough gas in the tank. And I just think really it's the more that you are pushing that you learn where that line is. I think that if we're so
Mm.
afraid of crossing that line to where we do get injured, we're never going to have the performance that we want or the fitness that we want. Sometimes to get that fitness or that performance, you have to ride that line, and you don't know where that line is of injury until you cross it. And I think pushing yourself hard is the best teacher as to where that line is. And that's what I'm here for, as if you cross the line and we can get you back on the other side.
I love that. That is actually a really good way of thinking about it. Is you don't know where that line is until you like push yourself to find it. So really good perspective. Thank you. All right, Josh, my last question for you is that I ask every guest on the podcast is, what does 1% healthier mean to you?
I think it means that consistency compounds. I think one thing that I've been surprised at as I've developed in my own athletics and I've treated a lot of people is that training age matters. How long you've been doing something like truly matters, both in your ability to recover from something and perform in something. And that if you expect all of it to happen in 1 week, you're going to be very disappointed, but you'll be, I think most of us drastically underestimate what we can accomplish in a year's time with consistency. And so to me, like, hey, 1% better every day doesn't mean that every day we are blowing our old selves out of the water, but that in a year, however long of consistency, we are like a whole new person or a whole new athlete. And I think that's what it means to me.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank
And for
you.
those that are listening that are wanting to connect with you further, learn from you, either online or in person, where can they find you? I can put the links in the description.
Yeah, my OnlyFans account. I'm just kidding. I am on Instagram at JSleskDPT. That's probably the best place. Yeah, I mean, if you want to work with me, I do online stuff as well too. But that the link is all in my bio on Instagram and stuff like that. That's usually the best place. So
Perfect. Well, I'll have your Instagram linked in the description box below. And again, thank you so much for being on the podcast and taking your time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you, Megan. Appreciate it.
Of course. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider sharing it with a friend or someone that you train with to continue this conversation on how to be healthy and strong and prevent injuries as you pursue your fitness goals. Also, if you enjoyed it, you can share it on your Instagram stories and tag me at 1%.healthier. I love to see what you learn from every episode and I appreciate you guys sharing the message. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to follow along on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube and leave a 5-star rating and review on Spotify and Apple. Thank you for doing that so much. I really, really appreciate it. I'll also have some related episodes in the description box below with other guests who have touched on these same topics of building endurance and staying strong that I think that you will also enjoy and to continue your journey and your growth as a runner, as an athlete. And again, thank you for being a part of the 1% Healthier community. It wouldn't be the same if you weren't listening. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.